Alright. Welcome to Sideboardmtg, and today I've got a meta coverage video for you. M19 is here, and we're already seeing these new cards show up in old decks and making completely new decks, and they're already getting 5-0s, so I wanted to make this video to let you guys know what to expect this weekend at your F&M. So we're going to get started here with our 7 categories. We're going to list the archetypes of each of the decks, the new innovations of those decks, if there are any, if the whole deck's a new innovation, the strengths of those decks, the weaknesses of those decks, complexity overall, how hard this deck is to play, how hard is it to discover the lines, why you should play it, and why not play the deck. So I hope you like. Give it a thumbs up if you do, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of this content. Alright guys, this very first deck here, this is going to be our Mono Red Wizards deck. Now this is an aggro deck, but it plays very much like a burn deck. All of the creatures in the deck are extremely good. They're very mana efficient, so you get to play this deck kind of like that modern style burn where you're trying to just maximize the use of the mana that you have. The deck can really hold its own with only 1 or 2 lands, and if you kind of hit up into 5 or 6, we've got Earthshaker Kenras and things like that to kind of help against flood protection. You do have Bomat Couriers and things like that to help draw more cards, along with Flame of the Kiln to keep you from running out of gas. Now, some of the major strengths to this deck is it's very fast. It's also one of the most consistent decks that you could run. You don't have to mulligan a lot. As I said, the deck fires off with just 1 land most of the time. You can put a lot of threats out, but it's also really good at casting multiple spells per turn when you do have 2 and 3 and 4 lands. Casting multiple spells per turn is actually really good against decks that are trying to spend 1 spell per turn to answer your 1 spell. Getting an extra dude down, chipping in, casting those lightning strikes, casting those shocks, getting your new Pyromancer down, which is the real new innovation here to this deck. Now, overall complexity on this deck, I'm going to put that as just kind of a 1 out of 3. As long as you're maximizing the use of your mana, the efficiency of the spells alone should take care of most decisions that you need to make. There's always that decision of when you turn your burn towards creatures or burn towards face, and that is going to cause that's going to cause some people to be better at this deck than other people, just knowing when to flip that switch. But overall, the deck's pretty straightforward. Kill your opponent, kill them dead. Why would you want to play this deck? I think you would want to play this deck if you were in a really control-heavy meta. The deck is really fast and can do a lot of damage by turn 4. So if their plans are to settle the wreckage or something like that on turn 4, they could be looking at so much damage that you can half swing against a settle the wreckage to ramp into an Earthshaker Kenra or something like that. So just depending on what their plans are. If they're planning on 1-for-1ing you, you're going to be able to get those your multiple creatures per turn down. And the overall, one of the best reasons to play it, and a lot of people actually say that's why they play red, is quick match times. It's going to be decided one way or another. So it's not as stressful on you. Some people do like those deep engaging games, and I'm not saying you can't have an engaging game with a red deck, but most of the time, you're just going to get in, you're going to get it over with, or it's going to be over with for you. And this is, so low to the ground that if you do get into the late game, then chances are you're probably not going to get there. And the reason you might not want to play that is kind of the exact same thing, the lack of an engaging game. Most of what's going to happen in the game is going to be decided very early. The deck does have some ways to draw out of it with Flame of the Kiln and stuff, but for the most part, you're not going to be playing these late, in-depth games. You're not going to be going to round 10 or 11 and playing these really in-depth games. So if that's what you're looking for, then this is probably not the deck for you. This deck is wanting to get things over with by turn 5. So That is your mono red wizards deck. The deck's pretty cool. I like the deck. But next we're going to be talking here about this Oketra's Monument deck. Now this is a go wide strategy. It is an aggro deck. We have a couple lords here, but one of the major things about this deck is it wants to just draw a ton of cards. And I do want to talk about one major new innovation to Oketra's Monument. So you're casting creatures for one less converted mana cost. Well, with Mentor of the Meek, when another creature enters the battlefield, power 2 whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card. So the one you're saving from Oketra's Monument, plus Oketra's Monument makes a warrior, and this does not say non-token creature. So the warrior enters the battlefield, you get a trigger on Mentor of the Meek. Pay your 1, draw a card. Your creature enters the battlefield, you get a trigger on Mentor of the Meek. Pay another one, draw another card. And it really allows this deck to really churn through itself. And it also has other draw engines such as Militia Bugler. Now, Militia Bugler is a pretty good card. I kind of like this card. It's a 3 mana, especially with Oketra's Monument. You're looking at 2 mana, 2/3, which puts it well within the vanilla curve if you're only paying 2 mana for it. You do get Vigilance, so it gets around Seal Away and things like that. But you get to look at those top 4 cards of your library, and if you find a creature with converted mana cost 2 or less, you're going to get to keep that. Now, one of the things that you may or may not like would be Angel of Invention, but when Angel of Invention enters the battlefield, especially if you get a late one and you already have a Mentor of the Meek on the battlefield, you're going to get quite a few triggers. If you choose the Fabricate mode to get the additional servos, each one of those will enter the battlefield and trigger your Mentor of the Meek, allowing you to draw more cards. Now, some toolbox creatures that have been added to this deck are Sun Cleanser, which will remove all counters from target creature or remove all counters from target player, depending on which one you pick. And then Remorseful Cleric, which gives it a little bit of action in the air, allowing you to chip in the air, but also allowing you to maintain control of the graveyards. Now, this is a one-sided Graveyard Wrath, which is really, really good. Now, this will dump or exile all the cards from target player's graveyard, and that's really, really important considering this is probably one of the best Dusk Till Dawn decks that you're going to find. Every creature in the deck can be brought back with Dawn, and most of the time you're not going to get your creatures up high enough to even worry about the Dusk. So one-sided Board Wrath, one-sided Graveyard Hate, really, really cool deck. I think that it's got a lot of potential coming up in the meta. I think people will be playing this deck. Now, that's kind of the major strength of the deck, is that it just goes so wide, and it is probably the most effective Dusk Till Dawn deck. So what makes it weak? It is kind of weak to sweepers. The deck, a lot of these cards, paying 3 mana for them is not exactly where the deck wants to be. So if you have an Abrade and you can get rid of the Oketra's Monument, that's going to be great for you. So that's kind of the major weaknesses, is just sweepers, full-on sweepers, like the fact that this is a Dusk Till Dawn deck, and most of the time it's not going to get above 3 power. It's also not going to get above 3 toughness. So if you have something that can just do 3 damage to all creatures, that's really going to set this deck back, and I highly recommend you having some sweepers this weekend because of this deck. Now, overall pilotability and complexity, it is a very easy to operate deck. You're not looking at doing a lot of things. One of the most tricky things or interactions would be the Oketra's Monument, warrior entering, drawing another card, and doing things like that. Counting your mana can be a little bit weird because the Oketra's Monument, drawing one can really change the number of spells that you might be able to play in a given turn, or losing one could really, really change the game plan that you had. So there's a little bit of complexity there, but overall the deck's pretty simple to operate. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 3 on complexity, mainly leaning closer to the 2 because it does at least get to go into the late game. You've got some flying action. You've got some complexity with your Dusk Till Dawns, knowing when to play, things like that. Even casting Dusk when there's not going to be anything to kill, just so that you can get a Dawn back and things like that. There are some engaging game plans. So why would you want to play this? Because you're Craig Wesco and you've been awaiting the return of White Weenie, right? Some people just love White Weenie, and I think this is it. It's definitely back here with the Oketra's Monument deck, Mentor the Meek, and the Militia Bugler, along with Sun Cleanser and Remorseful Cleric, giving it some tools, makes the deck really, really powerful. So. If you like White Weenie, then this is definitely the deck for you. Now, why would you not play this? You have a meta full of Sweltering Suns and Fumigates. You can actually play around Settle the Wreckage fairly well. It's actually a really good thing for you to swing in with a whole bunch of tokens, things like that. Them have to settle you. You just dig all of the lands out of your deck, and then at that point you can just kind of play everything, keep drawing cards. The more lands you have, the more power you're going to have. That's why you see this White Weenie deck running 25 lands. So, if there's not a lot of Settle the Wreckage, people are running Sweltering Suns and Fumigate over Settle, then you're definitely you probably don't want to play this deck. But if it's a heavy Settle market or meta for you, then White Weenie it up. All right, our next deck here is going to be the Mono Black Zombies deck. Now, if you've been watching YouTube today, you'll see that Seth Mansfield played the Mono Black Zombies deck. Now, he did not play the deck that 5-0'd a league, and I'm not 100% sure if he 5-0'd his. I've been working on the computer all day and haven't actually got a chance to watch his video. I plan to do that a little bit later. But this is the version of the deck that 5-0'd. It is a tribal aggro deck. A lot of you have been, just, hey, Zombies is back, and it wasn't really, that long ago that we had Crypt Breaker in the meta, and we see some of the exact same things that Crypt Breaker would do for us here in Graveyard Marshal. We get to exile a card from our graveyard and put a 2/2 black zombie onto the battlefield. Now, it doesn't make a really good blocker at instant speed because it's going to enter the battlefield tapped. It does cost 3 mana, but this is a really good late game mana sink, and it also runs the new Liliana. Now, we see this particular version of it only running 1 Liliana. I think Seth Manfield's version was running 2 Lilianas. He was running more Metallic Mimics and things. But Metallic Mimic, Death Byron, Liliana's Majesty, and Lord of the Accursed give this deck the opportunity to have up to 16 Anthem effects, or 16 Lords. Metallic Mimic being the honorary Lord of any deck. You can't actually use Liliana's neg ability because Metallic Mimic's a construct. While it's in the graveyard, it's not actually... it's a shapeshifter while it's in the graveyard. It's not actually a... zombie. So you can't actually use her neg ability to cast Metallic Mimic from the graveyard, but you can all of your other creatures. And that's kind of why she's here. This is a zombies deck. If you're going to get any value out of Liliana, this is where you're going to get it. And the whole deck itself is kind of a new innovation of an old deck. So it's good to see zombies back. I do like this deck. And let's talk about what's strong about this deck. First off, it's a zombie horde. It's going to flood the board with a bunch of resilient creatures. Yes, these creatures can come back. If you have your Death Byron, they have Death Touch, which means even if they're still small, they will get to eat your creatures if you match with them in combat. It allows them to just keep coming at you. If a zombie bites you, you're dead. You're going to end up in the graveyard with the zombies, and they're probably coming back anyway. The major strengths here are all the lords. The more zombies get on the battlefield, the more powerful the horde gets. The horde grows and grows and grows, and with cards like Liliana's Majesty, putting 2 more zombies onto the battlefield, plus buffing all the other zombies, making this a really hard lord to remove, or anthem to remove. I think that that just the sheer number of lords and the ability to just swarm the board is the major strengths to this deck. Now, as far as the major weaknesses here is, I think the deck's just a little bit low on removal because of the nature of the deck needing a high creature count and needing a high zombie count. You're kind of low on removal. There's not a lot of room for removal here. We've got 2 Vraska's Contempts, 2 Fatal Pushes, and a Cast Down. 5 pieces of removal there. 6. My bad, 6. We do have a Never Return. So you're looking at somewhere between like 4 and 7 pieces of removal. I believe Seth Mansfield's version was 5 pieces of removal. So you don't have a lot to work with there. But then again, Liliana herself could be worked in as a piece of removal using her Neg 2 ability. But most of the time, you're just wanting to flood the board, make them stop you. And Death Byron is a really, really good card at making sure that your zombies get through. All right. As far as pilotability, complexity, I'm going to give this a 1.5 to 2. It's pretty straightforward. You do need to pick what turn you play which one of your 3 drops. Are we bringing in a Lord of the Accursed here? Do I need to give that Menace? Is it time to swing? Giving Menace to a bunch of Death Touch zombies means that you get to apply 1 point of Death Touch here and 1 point of Death Touch to the other one. You only have to apply lethal to each creature. So that does mean that you get to kill multiple creatures. It is very strong there, and there's some interactions leaving back certain zombies so that you can do things. There is a little bit of complexity there, but for the most part, this is a straightforward deck. Get your creatures down. They will automatically make each other large. There are some good late game mana sinks, so 1.5 to a 2 out of 3 on the complexity. Not an extremely complex deck, but overall, the deck is a really good deck. Now, why would you play this? The return of zombies, of course. I mean, come on. Maybe you're a fan of tribal decks. If you like zombies, they're back. And I know there's a lot of you out there that do like zombies. So that's why you want to play this deck. Because zombies is back and it's mean. Now, why not play this? Your meta's full of Settle the Wreckage. I mean, Zombies is one of those decks where it's trying to build up, and then it wants to go for kind of an alpha swing there against those board stall scenarios and things. And just for that reason alone, you kind of might not want to play this in a heavy control meta. I don't think that this does really good against a meta that's full of sweepers. So if people are running a lot of sweepers in your meta, you might not be able to get there. This deck is a couple steps slower than the other decks. You're going to have to get set up and then go in for the attack. This is kind of more of a mid-range deck than it is really aggro, but it is full of creatures, and it is definitely an aggressive deck. You're trying to get in, and you're hard to stop. So, those are some reasons to play it, why not to play it. But overall, I think the deck's actually really good. I actually haven't lost to it, and I've played 3 or 4 times against it. So I've yet to lose to the deck, so I don't know what that really says about it. But I know that all of the games are extremely in-depth. They're pushing me way into the late game. I'm having to get in with flyers and things like that. So it is very weak to flyers. Next here, we've got a white-black aggro deck. Now, this is a Knights deck. So, Justin Clay, I know you're going to be happy to see this one. It is using some of the new cards from not only from Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan, but it's using Dominaria cards that we haven't seen get a lot of play, and one of the new cards from M19. So, Paladin of Atonement coming back here. This is a pretty cool card. We've seen the card around. It does some really good things, but when it dies, you gain a ton of life. Gaining the life could be exactly what you need. It also gets bigger if you've gained life. And I'm not 100% on this being the proper card in this slot. Maybe something else should be here. But I really, really like the Knights of Malice and the Knights of Grace, and the real topper here for this deck is the Valiant Knight. Other knights you control get +1/+1, and you can pay 5 mana, 2 white and 3 colorless. Knights you control gain double strike until end of turn. That alone is absolutely terrific. I think that if this deck had a little bit more lifelink to it, you could probably get away with using your Paladin of the Atonement a little bit better. But there's not really a lot of lifelink in the deck, so it's going to be really hard for you to gain that life. Now, Ariel here, she can absolutely take over the game. She's well priced, 4/4 for 4. She does have vigilance, so you can attack, and then after you attack or declare attack, you can pay 1 black and tap to kill something that might have been able to block her. So you can even let them, move on 2 blocks, allow them to make some blocks, and then tap to kill something. So Ariel is actually a really cool removal piece for this deck, and you'll notice that the deck actually doesn't have a lot of main board removal, just Fatal Push, Thopter Arrest, and Cast Down. Now, I do want to mention that people have been throwing Vona in here. Paying 7 life to destroy target non-land permanent is really, really effective, but do remember it is destroy. You are not exiling things. So you're not going to get Hazard with this. You're not going to officially take care of the Scarab God. Allowing them to be able to hit you for 7 is probably not what you want with, just a destroy mechanic. But being able to destroy, Argyle's Bloodfast, other enchantments and things like that is exactly what this deck was looking for. So Vona really comes in handy here. Now, strengths to this deck are the deck is really, really fast, and it's hard to kill these first striking knights. The deck can kind of sit back on the fact that it has a lot of first strikers, or it can actually start getting in with multiple first striking knights, and that can be actually really devastating for a lot of decks trying to put out a bunch of small dudes to be able to block those. The first strikers are just going to eat you up, especially when you start putting these anthem effects from Benalish Marshal and Valiant Knight onto the battlefield. So that's the major strengths of the deck. It can flood the board really quickly. The deck, it's pretty low to the ground. You're going to see some really powerful creatures really early in the game. Now, overall, though, the major weaknesses to the deck is the lack of card draw. The deck does lose steam quicker than a lot of other decks, and if you can deal with, cards like Ariel, you can deal with, things like that. They're not going to be able to continuously refill their hand. They do have some good 2-for-1s, History of Benalia, and things like that they're going to be able to get down, a couple extra, bodies and things like that without spending an extra card. But for the most part, if you can sweep the board away, you can deal with the cards they're playing 1-for-1, then you're probably going to beat them when you get further into the late game. If you can get larger than them and make sure that you kill their lords. Their lords are removable, so that is one of the weaknesses that we didn't see in zombies. Zombies are removable, but unless you exile them, a lot of them have the opportunity to come back with like Liliana and things like that. So, or at least be brought back from the graveyard. So there's a little bit more resilience in zombies than there is here in the Knights deck. The Knights are a little bit better suited to combat. To fight in combat to survive, whereas the zombies are willing to sacrifice themselves to kill multiple creatures per swing. Now, as far as the overall complexity of this deck again, I'm going to give this 1.5 to a 2, kind of like the zombies. It can get into those late games. There are going to be very specific lines you need to take, knowing when to remove a creature, knowing when to swing, and things like that. It is going to bring a little bit of depth and complexity to your games, knowing which what time to set up that History of Benalia, when to play a History of Benalia, and things like that, based on the other cards in your hand, so that you can get the maximum effect out of that History of Benalia swing. So that's kind of what this deck kind of waits for. It builds up, it parries, it blocks, it hides behind its shield of first strike until the History of Benalia goes off, and then at that point the first strike is so powerful that you have to get in front of it, and then you end up losing your creatures trying to block it. So that's kind of the overall game plan, and the complexity is really wrapped around building up that overall to make a swing. So why would you want to play this? Probably because you grew up watching a lot of Knights in Camelot. You really like Knights. You always wanted to be a knight in shining armor and go save your damsel in distress. And you probably cried a little bit when Elspeth died, right? right? Did you? Did you just a little bit? Okay. That's probably why you want to play this, because you want to play knights. That's why. I mean, it's a good deck. It's not a bad deck. If you want to play knights, play knights. It's not bad. We all have our preferences. Now, why would you not want to play this? You got a meta full of mid-range. You've got enough resilience and things that you can normally not swing into settles. You don't have to. Your creatures are hardy enough that you don't have to overcommit to the board. So you play around control very well. Most of your creatures are hardy enough that normally you're going to pull counter spells and stuff for playing your creatures. So you have a good matchup against control. But if you have a meta full of mid range, you probably don't want to play this. They're going to have good removal spells that will be able to remove your Knights of Malice, your Knights of Grace, and things. If there's a lot of red deck and things like that, you may or may not want this. A Knight of Malice can put the brakes on a lot of cards, but if there's damage-based removal which is always going to be red, then that's going to get you. So. Also, Yahini's Expertise is pretty bad. So, and those are cards we see a lot of the mid-range decks run. Is Yahini's, not full sweepers, but smaller sweepers. So, this deck is a little susceptible to mid-range. So, all right, that is your black-white Knights deck. Next here, we've got a green-black Stompy deck. Now, I know a lot of you guys like the Stompy decks, and I mean, come on, let's face it. This archetype is simple. This is Timmy Aggro. We're playing some things. We're trying to get our biggest dude down as quickly as possible. Starting on turn 2, we're dropping the heat. We've got Steel Leaf Champions coming down on 2. We've got Ronus coming down on 3, followed up with a Galta on 4. I mean, this deck is just hammering out the big dudes. And that's what it is. It's Timmy Aggro. Now, what's new about this deck? Nothing. Not a nothing. We've seen this deck around for a little while now. We know that the green-black Stompy deck is absolutely terrific. It is hiding right under those red-black aggro decks, or the red-black mid-range decks. It is right there. It is waiting for you to mess up and not kill that turn 1 Lana War Elf, so it can drop that Steel Leaf Champion and run over you. That's the plan. That's what this deck does. Galta is hard for anyone to stop. If you do not have that Vraska's Contempt in hand, you don't have that Unlicensed Disintegration, you don't have some absolute kill, Galta is going to end your game quickly. It is hard to kill Galta with burn-based removal, and there are a lot of decks using burn-based removal. Now, this deck is susceptible to sweepers and things like that. That's its major weakness, other than flying. If you have a good flying aggressive deck, you're probably not really worried about these mono green decks. Flying is actually really good in this current meta. Also, if you can stall these decks out, removing a couple early creatures, removing those Lana War Elves, sometimes they won't actually be able to get the deck online, being trapped with cards like Galta and things in hand. You can actually disrupt this deck pretty well with targeted removal. It does have 4 copies of Blossoming Defense, but that does throw them off their curve of being able to come down a little bit quicker. So, if they are playing on curve, try to disrupt them as much as possible, and you're going to do really well against this deck. I mean, like I said, it is really susceptible to flyers and spot removal. Also, if you do slow them down and you're running the Scarab God, well, good game. So you untap with the Scarab God against this deck. There's not going to be a lot they can do about it. Unless they've already gotten you into the position where you're using the Scarab God as a chump blocker, you're probably about to win the game. So they're weak to flyers, weak to the Scarab God, but overall one of the more powerful curve decks that you can be playing right now. If you're a Timmy, you want to be playing this. I'm going to give the complexity of this deck only a 1. I don't believe the deck is overwhelmingly complex. You're pretty much just trying to play your creatures. But that's kind of what makes the deck good to play. Sometimes you want to have a deck that is just blah, haha, killed you, and that's what this deck is. So if you're looking for that, maybe you're a Timmy. This runs a 12/12 Galta, Tim. Come on, Come on, Timmy. 12-12. Slam it. Windmill. Windmill, right? Alright. Why don't you want to play this? Because everyone in your meta is playing flyers, and you don't want to play this. Ton of flyers. Everyone's got Lyra. Everyone's got Angels. Everyone's got mono blue flyers at your meta. Whirler modules deck or something like that. You're not going to do really well here. Without Ronus, things like that, you're not going to have a lot of trample. If there's a lot of go wide strategies, they're going to be able to block you. Zombies have death touch. You don't do really well against the death touch. But other than that, the mono green deck, Galta just running over, crushing people. It's great. It's great. Stand in front of that with your little Goblin Chain Whirler, huh? Anyway, I guess if you're running Bolas and you've dealt 10 damage to it, now Chain Whirler blocks it and it dies, right? Even Bolas can't kill it, right? Let's move on to our Esper Control deck here. Now, this is just a targeted removal based control deck. It is all it's kill, counter and kill, counter and kill. We've got Cast Down, Fatal Push, Vraska's Contempt, Gear Hulks to get them back. We've got Essence Scatter and Disallow to stop. Really, really strong, card draw in this deck. It is a control deck. Now, you may ask, why is it Esper? It looks blue-black. The main reason this deck is Esper is because you have a Teferi. You want to play your Teferi. You have the split lands. You've been playing blue-black control. Bam. Out comes the Scarab God. In goes Teferi. Call it a new deck, right? That's pretty much the gist of it. We don't even see the Scarab God in the sideboard. I do want to say that we do have a couple copies of Training Wheels here in the sideboard of this Teferi deck. I like to call, Approach of the Second Sun, they are like the training wheels to these Teferi decks, and I highly recommend that if you are playing a Teferi WinCon deck, that you do have some Approach of the Second Suns in the deck somewhere, whether it's in the sideboard or in the main board. Because sometimes, you want to get more practice at that in-game gameplay, and I'm going to let this count for the blue-white control deck as well. When you're trying to, get more practice at that in-game gameplay, you might not want to, get there every game, because in certain games, it's going to get extremely complex, and you might want to, learn more interactions and things before you get too deep into it. An Approach of the Second Sun gives you that ability to just go, okay, wait a minute, this is getting crazy. I'm going to cast this spell. We're going to end this game. We're going to change the threat. We're going to go from here. And that's actually, something that you can do to just kind of, give yourself a little bit of leniency of, all right, we're going to try this Teferi thing here. Oh, wait a minute. That deck, I didn't play around something. That deck's now going to have an answer for this later. There's not going to be anything I can do about it. I cast too many of my disallows. Now I can't stop that Ipnu Rivulet trigger at the end of the game. We need to change things. And the best way to do that would be just cast your Approach from Second Sun. So, force that Ipnu Rivulet trigger there, things like that. So, I do want to say, that's kind of the major innovation about this deck is it's just a blue-black control deck. It's splashed white. We've got a Fumigate and that Approach to the Second Suns and things in the sideboard, and some Teferis in the main board. But for the most part, it's a blue-black deck. Now, this deck is really strong versus creature-based decks. It has perfect mana. There's not much you're going to be able to do as far as disrupting this deck. This deck is going to be controlling the game. Very few times are you going to find yourself being the control deck in a matchup versus this deck. They are always going to be the control deck, or if you're playing this, you are always going to be the control deck. Very few times will you ever be the aggressor. So remember that this is a really patient deck, and that's one of the strengths is that perfect mana and is really, really strong against anyone that thinks that they're partially controlled. You're going to be able to really hose those mid-range strategies. But the deck, I find that it's very, very weak versus a pure control deck. You're going to have more dead cards there. You do have a lot of kill spells in this deck, so you're going to have to time your your game one, how you play your game one against another control deck, but it's actually probably weakest against a very aggressive early deck that can cast multiple spells per turn, something like the mono red wizards or something like that. You're going to be pretty weak against those. Spending 3 mana to stop a 1 mana or a 2 mana spell is not exactly where you want to be. The efficiency of some of the spells are a little bit weaker than you would like to see them. That is why it does run the essence scatters and the negates, but for the most part the deck is instant speed, so you don't have to worry about casting anything on your turn other than search for Azcanta and the fairies. So like you can come down at instant speed. You don't have to worry about anything after that. Now the overall complexity, I'm gonna just go ahead and say the complexity on all 5 of these control decks is 3 out of 3. Playing control is very hard. Certain matchups, you've got to value certain counter spells or certain kill spells more than others, taking damage, when not to take damage, when to destroy something, when to just hold back for a better target for that removal spell, when to just let the turn go. This is not one of those decks where you're going to want to maximize the usage of your mana every single game or every single turn. Sometimes it will simply just be the maximized use of your mana is to leave it untapped so that your opponent can't cast anything. So bluffing, things like that come into play in control decks. So definitely a 3 out of 3 on complexity. This deck even has the training wheels in it with the approach of the second sun, so you don't have to go all the way into your Teferi. We see the torrential gear hulks here in the deck as well, giving you another option to kill someone. But overall, the deck is really, really strong versus those creature-based decks, but a little bit weak to really, really fast decks. And then, why would you want to play this? Because you like blue-black control, you own Teferi, and yeah, that's pretty much it. You own Teferi and the lands, and you like blue-black control. That's kind of like the major reason. I mean, it's this or blue-black control. I do like the Teferi here. Maybe you don't want to play the Scarab God or something like that. Why would you not want to play the Scarab God? But maybe you don't. Maybe your meta's full of blue-white control, and you want to play this. But I'm going to say that if your meta is full of the pure blue-white control, they've got more counters than you in most situations. They can stop a lot of your creatures or your threats. There is as instant speed as you are, and that is going to be a very hard matchup for you. So if you've got a meta full of really, really fast decks and blue-white control, you probably don't want to play this. But then again, this deck pairs up really, really well against those mid-range decks and stuff. So it is a choice to make, and it is a really, really powerful deck. Now, next here, we've got the Jeskai Control. Now, this is a cool deck. I like this deck here. We're talking a red-blue deck that is reminiscent of the one we had in Kaladesh. I mean, just look at this deck. We've got, Kaladesh block cards. We've got, Disallow was Kaladesh block, Glimmer of Genius, Whirler Virtuoso. I want to say that we had Essence Scatter back then, but not 100%. Torrential Gearhulks, things like that. This is a lot like the last deck that we spoke about, only this has burn-based removal and has a little bit more of a defense against mid-range and control or mid-range decks that are trying to attack your Teferi. Whirler Virtuoso gives you the ability to put some blockers out in front of those aggressive or mid-range decks, giving you a little bit better protection against those aggressive decks, but you're losing a little bit in the side against those control decks. So just kind of think about that if you decide you want to play this deck. Now there's no M19 cards here, and that's kind of it. I mean, the only real innovation here is Whirler Virtuoso here. I mean, we're not seeing any just breakout cards here. We may end up in the future seeing the new Mana War get a little bit of play, but for right now, Whirler Virtuoso is protecting Teferi. Now, because of that, that is one of the strengths. Teferi's a really, really powerful card, and now that we are running him in a control deck where the deck itself can protect him, but also you can put creatures in front of your opponents and things like that. Even in control matchups, though, you can turn your dead cards like Harness Lightning into extra Thopter tokens to push more pressure against your opponent. So maybe it does have a little bit better game against some of the control decks than I'm giving it credit for. Whirler Virtuoso, along with Harness Lightning, just kind of making the world a better place there for Teferi, you know, the hero of Dominaria. Anyway, most of this deck's instant speed. I mean, that it's very strong against aggressive decks. I mean, the Magma Spray, like if you've been playing against, you know, Scrap Heap Scrounger and things, this is really good. It's kind of weak versus multiple spells per turn. It does have some cheap removal and things, and you know, but if you can make it play multiple spells per turn, there's going to be a point where it needs to spend its expensive card draw, and you know, Glimmer of Genius being, you know, the expensive card draw there, you're going to kind of resolve a threat eventually there, and that threat can get through for a little while or put them off of their curve of getting to Teferi. Now, this is not necessarily as patient of a game plan as the blue-white or the blue-black, but then again, this deck, you know, has a couple extra aggro lines where you might actually find yourself the aggressor here. So this is going to play a little bit more like your tempo control. So you know, that's something that you might want to think about if you want to play this. Now, overall complexity, again, you know, 3 out of 3. It's a control deck. We've already covered that. But like I said, you know, why do you want to play it? Because you like tempo and you're really tired of, you know, Scrap Heap Scrounger decks and things like that. This is really going to hose those Scrounger decks. Anybody trying to bring things back from the graveyard, this Magma Spray is going to be absolutely terrific. Even if you need to pair it with a Harness Lightning, it doesn't mean you have to put all of your energy into that creature, which you can then bank for Whirler Virtuosos. It gives you something to do with the Glimmer energy. Yeah, you might like this deck if you like to play tempo. Now, why wouldn't you want to play this deck? There's no Scrap Heap Scrounger decks at your meta, which means you've got Magma Spray for kind of like no reason. I don't know. I guess if there's just no red-black at all in your meta, then this might not be that great. But you know, it's still a fun deck, and if you were a fan of the red-blue control deck in the past, then it's back. I mean, this is as close as you're going to get to it. All right, let's move on to our next deck here. Now, this is Temur Control. Now, Temur Control, this is a ramp-based control deck, Hour of Promise deck. A lot of us are really familiar with Hour of Promise. In case you're not, the big innovation of this deck, you know, when it first came out, where people were playing, you know, Thematic Compass on turn 2, then playing a ramp spell on turn 3. Here we've got Grow from the Ashes. You could run Gift of Paradise or New Horizons, I think. Grow from the Ashes gives you a little bit more flexibility, so you can go get 2 lands later. It does kind of get played for 3 mana a lot of times. If you have it on 3, don't be afraid to play it. It's part of the curve, so that and on 4 you can play your Hour of Promise. At that point, hopefully you'll have enough deserts. There's a high desert count in the deck, which are actually part of the main win condition of this deck. But if you have enough deserts, you get your zombies, and then if you are able to get Arch of Araska because you had at least 2 deserts on the battlefield already, then that means you're going to have the City's Blessing on turn 4, and you're going to be rocking and rolling, Chief. I mean, it's going to be a good day for you at that point, because you're going to untap with the ability to cast these huge Sifter Worms, which actually check cards like Spring to Mind and Commit. Because some people don't exactly understand how this works, I do want to cover this really quick. So, split cards, if they're on the stack, they are the converted mana cost of the side of the card that is being cast. So if you cast Spring, you're putting Spring on the stack. But when something is viewing the card itself, it is looking at Spring to Mind. If you cast Mind, you're putting Mind on the stack. That is a 6 converted mana cost spell. But if you're viewing the card with something like Sifter Worm, where you're going to, scry 3, then reveal the top card. You're looking at the entire card. It's not on the stack. It's not being cast. The overall converted mana cost of this spell is 9, and it's both an instant and a sorcery. So things like combustible or Torrential Gearhulk can actually cast either side of Commit to Memory or either side of Spring to Mind, as far as I know. The only other thing that could be there is the first spell dictates the instant sorcery half. I don't know if that's how that is worded or not, but for the most part, the part that you need to be casting from the graveyard's already instant speed, so no point in wasting a Torrential Gearhulk on that. You can just cast, unless you just want to play. No, there's no point in wasting a Torrential Gearhulk on that. Period. Anyway, yeah, cool deck. Gets to gain a lot of life because it checks these at 9, checks these at 10. So a lot of life can be gained off of these Sifter Worms, and with Hour of Devastation as a 4 of in the deck has the ability to just wipe most boards. I do want to note that Sifter Worm does not die to Hour of Devastation, so you're going to be left with quite a big fella. Now in the sideboard we've got Carnage Tyrants, and there's a lot of decks that are really weak against Carnage Tyrants, including Magma Spray, which is good against the Scrap Heap Scrounger deck. So really cool control deck here. I like what's going on with the Temur Control. We originally seen this as Saffron Olive's deck that Todd Stevens did really well with. He played an awesome game, and so I really like this deck. It's good to see it go from a 4-color spice list to a more tuned list. Now, the main reason that the list has been tuned from that, and some of you guys might be like, why not play the 4-color spice list? Well, mainly because the 4-color spice list was completely built using restrictions. That was for the standard Super League. Yeah, Super League. Anyway, the Super League would not allow them to put the same card in all of their decks or multiple of their decks. They could only have so much bleed over. So this deck, basically, when it was originally built, was making use of all the cards that no one else wanted and didn't really have a Braid. So Braid is one of the new innovations to this deck. The fact that this deck has been honed down into 3 colors means that this might actually be a ramp strategy that is viable, and we may end up later deciding that maybe Sifter Worm or some of these other versions may not be the best way to go. But then again, Sifter Worm might be exactly where you want to be. It could become some of these new Elder Dragons and things like that, giving this deck a couple more resilient threats. But the deck has really good mana, and that's one of its strengths. It's really good against strong, the mid-range strategies. If it can get to its Hour of Devastation, you don't have a way to stop that. It's more than likely going to reset the board, and at that point, it can deal with most things on the battlefield. So it's really good against aggressive strategies, and it's really weak against control for the most part. Now, complexity again, 3 out of 3. Learning which lines to take, which spell to cast at which time. Do we cast Grow from the Ashes for 3, or do we wait and we cast it for 5? Is this the proper time to bring or to cast Mind? Do I commit this spell? How am I going to deal with it when it comes back? Do I blink of an eye my own Sifter Worm, or do I blink of an eye the Scarab God on their turn, or something like that? Like you just, there's a lot of lines to pick. It gives really in-depth gameplay. And why do you want to play this? Because you're a ramp fan. If you like ramp, it's not the first time that we've used ramp to play big dudes, to play big spells, and this deck does both of those things. So we're calling it the control deck because it wipes the board and then plays its big stuff. But that's kind of what ramp has always done. So in a way, maybe we should be calling this team a ramp. But yeah, that's kind of why you'd want to play it. Is you want to play some ramp, you like that, and why wouldn't you want to play it? Because you think Sifter Worm is stupid. You don't want to play it. That's the only reason you wouldn't want to play it. This is a cool deck. I'm telling you guys, this is a cool deck, and it is really powerful. It has the tools in the sideboard to be really good against even control decks. These Carnage Tyrants are going to be absolutely devastating. So you're going to be able to put a lot of threats down against control decks. You may or may not need the Hour of Devastations and things like that. So there's a lot of interactive gameplay here. I can't give a good reason why not to play this deck. The deck looks super fun, and it is very competitive. Way to sneak one in on us here, Saffron. Alright, next we're going to be talking about our blue-black control deck. UB Control here. This is straight, pure kill counter, the Scarab God, Torrential Gearhulk. The new innovations are pretty simple. Then we got 2 Anticipates and a Murder. Murder's a new card that is a reprint. Let's pull that up for you guys here. Double black and 1 destroy target creature. Anticipate is a really, really good card selection, allowing you to look at the top 3 cards of your library and then place one of them into your hand and tuck the others under the bottom of your library. That's a really, really powerful card. It's a really good dig tool. Hey, you need to get deep into your library. You can go 3 cards deep, get the tool that you need, the card that you need, put that into your hand, and go from there. It is instant speed, 2 mana, great card, reprint, good to see it back, and yeah. Blue-black control. I mean, there's not a lot of innovations here, just the anticipates and murder. As far as the strengths of the deck, there are so many good removal spells, so many good counter spells in the blue-black colors that the deck is actually really, really flexible and has some extremely powerful finishers. The Scarab God is not Teferi. You are not going to wait around for the next 20 turns to end the game. You are going to end the game very quickly with the Scarab God, especially if you have a graveyard full of things. If your opponent has a graveyard full of things, you're going to do some crazy stuff with the Scarab God. Or they're going to look at their hand and go, well, I can't stop him from untapping. They look at the graveyard and go, and I can't beat my own Hazard. You counter a Hazard, he's gone, fellas. He's going to be back on your side very shortly. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, it's got some dead cards against pure control. I mean, with all of these kill spells, with the creature counter, things like that, there's not a lot of control versus control here in the main board. We've got 5 actual counter spells here with the syncopates and the disallows. We've got a commit, which is kind of like an honorary counter spell. You're not really countering it, which gets around certain things like cannot be countered. So you got to consign to oblivion. You can put some things back in their hand, make them get rid of some stuff. But for the most part, you're gonna have a lot of dead cards against control decks. So that is something to kind of consider if you're in a meta full of control decks. Then you probably don't want to play this. Now, as far as why you would want to play this, probably because you don't have the new Nicol Bolas or the cards for Grixis, or you don't have Teferi or the cards for Teferi. I personally like the versions of this deck that run a splash of white and throw Teferi and the Scarab God in the deck. I think those give you a little bit more depth, a little bit more card draw. I really like those cards, and a lot of times you can just sacrifice a Glimmer of Genius for that Teferi. So spreading your threats out, I kind of like that idea. Anyway, for the most part, that's your blue-black control deck. Pretty straightforward. It's kill-based control. And now we're going to get into your blue-white control deck. Now this is it. This is the Puritan of control. This is your top tier. Teferi is going to win the game. Let's look at these. Let's look at these win cons here in the main board. We're going to Ipnu Rivulet them out? No Ipnu Rivulet. What could we possibly do to kill our opponent? Well, maybe we could beat them in the face with a Gearhulk. Nope, no Gearhulk. Teferi. That's it, guys. You are going to absolute control the game, or you're going to lose. Complexity on this deck, I know I have everything rated, 3 out of 3, but if I could give even more complexity to a deck, the blue-white control deck is it. There are no training wheels here. When we look at the sideboard, you're not going to, see, Approach of the Second Sons. This is the real deal. No training wheels. It does have Lyra, which is good against the red decks and things, because a lot of times you can't take the red decks all the way to turn. So this is a very complex deck to play. Now, its strengths are game 1 win percentage is through the roof. Most decks do need to put something in from their sideboard to be able to defeat you. You have absolute removal. You are at instant speed. There's not much you can't deal with. Your removal spells like Cast Out work really well against non-creature based spells. You've got more counter than most decks. Your draw is through the roof. It's amazing. It's amazing. The deck is the plan is to absolutely take control of the deck. It's not or control of the game. It has no new cards, but that game one win percentage and all the card draw and the sweepers. You hear me talk about some of the other decks. They're really weak to sweepers, and this deck is packing them. It's got the heat right where it needs it. But overall complexity through the roof. Why do you want to play it? Because you want to prove that you can, probably. You want to play this if you're a real control player. You like to fancy yourself a real control player, and you don't mind spending 49 out of 50 minutes of your match in game 1. Right? Come on, guys. This is a real control player's deck. The deck is no joke. It is powerful. It is also very hard to play. Why wouldn't you want to play this? Don't lie to yourself. If you're not on this level, don't take this to the F&M. Just because you have the cards, don't take this to F&M if you're not very comfortable with playing it. If you are not comfortable with playing it, I highly recommend putting a couple of Approach of the Second Sons in the deck. It will make it very more it'll be more lenient. Okay, you won't always have to go to that Teferi finish. You'll start to get practice with that Teferi finish, but you will have that option for the Approach of the Second Son. Once you're really good with your end game, and this deck does play end game like no other, once you're really good with your end game, then you can take the Approach of the Second Sons out and be a big boy like everyone else, all right? Or a big girl, whatever it is. Personally, my wife loves this deck. She thinks this deck's great. She's a control player, though. She's always been a control player, and she's extremely patient. If you're not a patient person, don't play this deck. I'm telling you, don't play this deck. All right, guys, that is our last control deck. Next, we're going to talk about the closest thing to combo we have here in Standard. It's not... there are some combo decks, there are some combo finishers, but none of those really top a lot. We don't have anything, just like tier 1 combo decks. It's really dangerous to make a tier 1 combo deck. They're hard to fight, they're hard to disrupt. So this is like combo valued. The deck can be considered, mid-range or aggro or something like that. It does have a lot of creatures. It is trying to get in there, but this is a blue-black GPG deck. And I accidentally pulled up the blue-white GPG. Anyway, the blue-black GPG deck here has more self-mill capability than the blue-white version. However, it doesn't have the speed of being able to get that Godfather's Gift out on turn 3. Blue-white does have that turn 3 nut draw that it can get those decks out. Oh yeah. Anyway, this deck, the major game plan and the major new innovations is to fill its graveyard as quickly as possible, then get that Gate to the Afterlife down with 6 creatures in the graveyard, tap it, and then go ham with a Godpharaoh's Gift. And that's pretty much the game plan here. If this deck can start, bringing back a Ravenous Chupacabra for free every turn, plus casting their spells every turn, they're going to be doing a lot of work. Kitesail Freebooter gives them a lot of resilience against abrades and things like that. If you go to kill their Kitesail Freebooter or something like that, they get the abrade out of your hand long before you actually get a chance to use it. A lot of times you won't even see the Gate to the Afterlife in these decks until turn 5, where they can tap it and sack it at the in response to something like an abrade. So you're going to want to save the abrade for the Godpharaoh's Gift itself. One of the biggest pieces of advice against playing against these decks is make sure you have that check in the main phase of your opponent, of their first main phase. You do want to stop them before they can actually begin combat. So make sure you're doing that. And then the overall innovations here is just the Stitchier Supplier. This deck is really strong at filling its graveyard. It has a high count of value creatures, and it's resilient against abrade. Now, As far as weaknesses go, even though it's resilient against a braid, braid is still a weakness to the deck. Basically, the deck is trying to build that resiliency because it's trying to compensate for its weaknesses. Now, artifact and graveyard hate are going to be other weaknesses to this deck, but because, again, it is really, really good at filling its graveyard, even graveyard hate might not be enough if it's not reusable. So do think about that if you guys are running something like Crook or something like that. Remember, Silent Gravestone does not affect this deck. The God Pharaoh's Gift does not actually target a card in the graveyard. So anyway, if if you like this deck, I mean, it's a pretty complex deck to play, but it does have a natural fail rate to it. You could just not hit the cards you need. You could hit all lands with your mill spells. Your opponents might be able to play around your Stitcher suppliers, things like that. There's a lot of Magma Sprays getting played. Magma Spray might get your supplier. You don't get the additional 3 cards. It makes it a little bit harder for you to fill your graveyard. So, playing around things like that is going to give you a little bit of complexity. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5, or 2.5, I mean, out of 3. There are some complex lines here. You do need to know when and when not to play around a braid and negate, things of that nature. When you can get your gate to the afterlife down, when, getting your gate to the afterlife down just to, block and things like that. But for the most part, it's fairly straightforward. There are some complex lines. It can take you deeper into the late game. You are running some extremely powerful cards. So why do you want to play this? Probably because you're a combo player and the other combos out there are kind of jank. Like, this is pretty much it. I'm going to do this setup. I'm going to get these things here. Then I'm going to play this card and combo off with the setup that I already have. And now I have this really, really powerful artifact into play a couple turns ahead of schedule. And that's kind of the game plan. This deck is for someone for cheaters. You want your 1/2s to be 4/4s, and you want your 1/1s to be 4/4s, and you want to take my creatures and kill me with my creatures. You want to cheat your expensive spells. You don't want to pay 7 for your God Pharaoh's Gift. That's a cheater's deck. You want to cheat. You want to get some things into play. You want to do some broken stuff. This blue black God Pharaoh's Gift is probably the deck for you. I have run into it online. The deck is very mean. Has some really good lines. So why wouldn't you want to play this deck? Control heavy meta. The Jeskai Control deck is going to do really, really good at destroying this deck. The Temur Control deck is going to do mean things against this deck. The Temur Control deck in particular has 4 main board of braids, which a lot of decks are not running right now. So if you've got some players that like to play jank and they're playing the Temur Control, you might not want to be playing a God Pharaoh's Gift deck in your meta. And that goes for our next deck as well, which is the blue-white God Pharaoh's Gift. Now, a lot of the same things we said last God Pharaoh's Gift deck, the blue-black deck, those are going to translate over here. The deck's really fast. All the combo aspects of it, you just have a different way of setup. Instead of using Gate to the Afterlife, you're using a spell called Refurbish. You're just going to, throw it in the graveyard and get it back. Now, you do have the opportunity to cast that Refurbish on turn 3, and I will explain that really quick for some of you that might be new to the deck, but most of us know this already. You turn 1 Minister of Inquiries, you gain 2 energy. You pass the turn, they pass back, untap, you go ahead and mill yourself for 3 that turn, or you can actually wait to the end of their turn here. But you need to play Search for Azcanta. You play Search for Azcanta on that turn, and before your next turn, you go ahead and tap that Minister of Inquiries. And then, on turn 3, untap, upkeep, draw, or untap, upkeep, Search for Azcanta trigger. With the trigger on the stack, mill with Minister of Inquiries. Whatever you get off the Search for Azcanta, you dump it into the graveyard. Wow, dude. You dump it into the graveyard, and then after you dump it into the graveyard, you will have 7 cards in your graveyard, flipping Search for Azcanta into a viable land, which uses this as ramp. You now have 4 mana to cast a Refurbish. Did you get lucky enough to have all of those things? And now, out of the 7 cards, is there an Angel of Invention, and is there a God Pharaoh's Gift in the graveyard to bring back? It is hard to do. I have done it a few times myself. It does happen, but that is one of the quickest, most powerful things that can be done in Standard is a turn 3 God Pharaoh's Gift. It can happen. This is that combo of getting all of this stuff down. So if you're that combo player and you want to play the most competitive combo, see if you can get your turn 3 God Pharaoh's Gift. If you don't, see if you can get your turn 4. It's still pretty powerful on turn 4, guys. Alright, as far as strengths and weaknesses, the strength is just that. It has one of the most powerful combos in Standard, being able to just power that out, having those creatures there, but the weakness is a natural failure rate. It is weak to a braid. Well-timed abrades, well-timed negates will slow you down, naturalizes, things like that. Graveyard hate. There are people packing answers for this. It's hard to get them off on turn 3. Just saying. If you can get your turn 3 kill to go off, or your turn 3 win con here, you're going to be doing alright. And that win con is, basically just that Angel of Invention. Turn 3, smack you for 6, gain 6. Hope your opponent didn't miss land. Anyway, that's the blue-white God Pharaoh's Gift deck. I'm going to say that it's a 3 out of 3. There are some complexities there. You're going to get some engaging games. I've actually taken this game down to the point where we're going to mill ourselves more than I have any other deck. So, very in-depth gameplay and stuff like that. Really cool deck. A lot of card draw, a lot of card selection. You're really going to churn through your deck and find the pieces that you need. Plays a lot like a combo deck. So, again, if you're that combo player, you're going to love this one. And there's a ton of abrades in your format. You probably don't want to play this. You don't really like that combo play aspect. You just want to play something a little bit more straightforward. I just want to put my creatures down. We'll do combat math and things like that. Then this is probably not the deck for you. So, alright, moving on into our mid-range decks. We've got 6 to cover here, and we're going to kind of move pretty quickly through them. This first one here is the green-black Constrictor deck. Now, there's nothing new here. The big deal about this one is this is your synergy-based mid-range deck. Now, there's nothing new. It's still just a snake deck, and if you've been playing Standard for any point in the past 2 years, you know about this card. You know about Winding Constrictor. This has been the most consistent deck to continuously put up top 8 finishes with very few changes, always just adding a couple new cards as cards come out. It seems like, Wizards has put out just enough to keep this deck from being broken, but always enough to keep this deck viable. There are a couple different versions of this we've seen, Sultai versions. We've even seen people splash white in the deck, but for the most part, it's a Winding Constrictor deck. It's going to, get a lot of value out of having multiple creatures that work really well with each other, and Winding Constrictor being the major one. It does have that aspect of all of your creatures have synergy with Winding Constrictor, but all of your creatures have the overall synergy of the +1/1 counters, which means they have, synergy with cards like Rishkar. Now, I do want to say that another one of the strengths to this deck, and one of the reasons it has been as powerful as it has, is because of a Winding Constrictor. Rishkar opener is one of the most powerful openers you can have as well. You're looking at turn 3, having 9 power onto the battlefield. This is absolutely phenomenal and hard to deal with. Fatal Push is actually really, really good against this deck. Having targeted removal, being able to pick out certain spells at certain creatures at key points in time is going to be exactly what you want to do here. Being able to, it doesn't matter if you're dealing 3 damage or 10 damage, if you can hit the Jade Light Ranger for 1 point of damage with the triggers on the stack, they will still get the Explorer triggers, but there'll be no +1/1 counters. You can stop it at 1 before it grows much, much bigger than that. So remember, Jade Light Ranger has the potential to put 4 +1/1 counters on it when Winding Constrictor is on the battlefield. So if you have something like a Walking Ballista, go ahead and shoot that while you can. Magma Spray, shoot it while you can because it's going to get out of range really quick, which is another strength to the deck. It does outgrow the range of most burn-based removal very fast. Now, as far as weaknesses go, that spot removal, full sweepers are really good against the deck. Burn-based sweepers and neg 1/1 sweepers, most of the ones we have right now are only -2 and -3, so those are not really going to do a whole lot for us. But full sweepers like Fumigate, Cleansing Nova, things like that, they're definitely going to take care of the battlefield there. Now, the deck doesn't have a ton of draw because the draw is kind of stuck into the creatures itself. So if you can sweep the board, you have done a huge damage, a huge chunk of damage to this deck, making it completely reset. However, it plays around Settle the Wreckage very well because most of its creatures are very threatening in themselves, so you do have to counter and make sure that you're targeting everything this deck throws at you. Now, complexity, I'm actually going to say a 3 out of 3. I originally thought this was just a straightforward, 1 out of 3 deck, but over the past year and a half, I've really come to respect those people that have been on the green-black snake plan and have just kind of stuck to it. It has done really, really well for them. Golgari has been a really good tribe. I'm going to say that Wizards really done it right when they were working on, what cards could or could not break this deck. We don't see it break much, but it's always a viable deck in Standard. I just love what they did here. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 3. There's always some complex lines. Knowing when to pitch a card off the top of your library or something like that is going to be kind of crucial. So there's some combat math situations and stuff in this deck that are pretty awesome. So yeah, it's a pretty cool deck. I like it. Now, as far as why you would want to play it. Maybe you just started playing Magic. Even though you're going to get that complex gameplay, it's actually simple and straightforward to play. So if you just started playing Magic, this is a really good spot to start out. It has enough complexity to it. It has enough interactions that aren't really, really hard to understand. Glint Sleeve Siphoner, earning the extra point, points of energy with a Winding Constrictor. The synergies are not, overly hard to understand. So if you are new to the deck, and you want to really get a full dive into Standard and into Magic, this is a really good place to start. And because a lot of this deck is actually found in the Counter Surge deck, which is one of the Challenger decks, it makes this deck actually really, really cheap to pick up the cards for. So, but why would you not want to play this deck? Let's face it, it's Green-Black Constrictor. If you were going to be playing it, you would have already been playing it. Alright, let's move on. Here we've got the red-black mid-range deck. Now this one top-8'd, 5-0'd, but I'm actually going to show you another one that 5-0'd that is, it's not on the record because the record wasn't out when, I 5-0'd here. So I'm going to show you my 5-0 list. It's a little bit different, and I'll explain some of the choices I made. But for the most part, these red-black mid-range decks, they're it. They are they're the top tier. They're the big dogs on the block. Everybody's trying to take them and the blue-black mid-range decks down. Blue-black just won the U.S. Nationals. This is a very aggressive mid-range as far as the archetype goes. You are trying to finish the game quickly, but you have really good depth in the late game. You have some really good flyers. Your resiliency is really, really good. You're pretty resilient against sweepers and things like that, because Heart of Kirin, Scrap Heap Scrounger, those sort of things. Even if you go the other route with instead of Heart of Kirins using the Phoenixes, that's also really resilient to sweepers and things. I personally think that the Phoenixes are better than the Heart of Kirins as of right now because everyone's trying to play zombies. The Phoenix actually pairs up really well in that matchup, being able to, accept a hit from a Death Touch zombie, kill that zombie, and then come back, because they don't have a lot of removal. So the chances of them actually having removal in their hand is normally slim, and your Phoenix ends up 2 for 1ing, or even 3 and 4 and 5 for 1ing, just not allowing them to get in. But the Phoenix also gives you, the ability to attack in over top of the zombies once you get your ground base set up. Now, this is one of those decks that can do that. I've played a lot of this deck lately, and I am really fond of the deck. We see some coming off the Soulscar Mages a little bit. Even I find myself taking mine out and putting them in the sideboard from time to time. As far as new innovations to this deck, there's not a lot. Some people are trying to put Banefire in the deck, but if you want to do that, you can. Most people are just fluctuating with the main 60. What are they putting in? What are they taking out? There's normally not a lot of changes to the deck. We see some run more Soulscar Mages, some run less, some run more Heartacarians, some run less. I will go ahead and show you, my version here. This is a version that me and my wife worked on. I was helping her tune the red-black deck that she wanted to play. She wanted to play top-tier deck. She's a Spike, all right? I'm a Johnny. I'm married to a Spike. What do? Right? You give them your best deck, and you get to play with everything. Win-win. All right. Anyway, this version actually has 2 Hazards, 3 Chandras, and 2 Rekindling Phoenixes. I don't have any Heartacarians here. I am running more Soulscar Mage than they are. More Glorybringers, things of that nature. But he's got more Hazard the Fervents, and I find that Hazard is really good in the mirror, but I'm really liking the Phoenix right now. It is an aggressive blocker. It allows you to, block on your turn, or block on their turn, and even if it dies, a lot of times you're going to get that back to get over in the air, and because of its 4 power, it trades with most things. Against anything that doesn't have a lot of removal, this is going to be absolutely phenomenal. Now, one of the main reasons to even be playing red-black right now is because of Unlicensed Disintegration. This card is absolutely terrific, but we are seeing that, we're kind of backing off that Unlicensed Disintegration. Even I'm down to 2 in my main board, and that's mainly because of how hard it is to actually hit that black mana. So I do want to point out that I am running 1 swamp in the deck. More than not, I am finding that people will Field of Ruin your only black source, because they know how hard it is for you to have black mana. Now, in the past, I did have multiple Aether Hubs in the deck. I've ended up cutting back on the Aether Hubs a little bit. I needed just another split land, so Aether Hub does fit the purpose, but we don't really have any other way to get energy back. So, why would you want to play this deck? I mean, it chokes your opponents out. I mean, this is major strength. It has really great in-depth game. If your opponent chokes at all, if their deck chokes at all, this deck is going to punish them early game, and then the late game value of this deck really gets in there. The first strike mixed with the burn based removal, along with Soulscar Mage being able to wither your opponent's creatures down, is absolutely terrific. So you have some really resilient threats, and you have some really aggressive threats. Glorybringer, Chandra, we're all very used to these cards just taking over games. Pianalar, buying you time, kind of works the same way that Whirler Virtuoso is working to protect Teferi. We're using that here to protect our Chandras. So, or our life total in general. Most of the time, though, when you're playing this deck, you are racing, and this deck can race very fast. Now, as far as what this deck's weak against, it's actually pretty weak against all of the gods. If someone plays, Aronis or a Hazoret, there's not going to be a whole lot you can do about that. As far as the Scarab God goes, there's not going to be a lot you're going to be able to do about the Scarab God either. He is going to take over the game. You just don't have a lot going on there. You can remove him. We do have a Magma Spray in the sideboard, but for the most part, you're trying to get in there and get them down. This is a very aggressive mid-range deck, and you need to get those life totals down as quickly as possible. So, Why would you want to play it? Because it's a top tier deck, and you're a spike, right? Why wouldn't you want to play it? You're not a spike, and if you sleeve this up, it just make you feel bad, right? Yeah. All right. Let's move on into Grixis Midrange here. Now, our last three decks are Grixis decks, and we've got Grixis Midrange, Grixis Energy, and Grixis Red. So, all of these decks are really trying to do the exact same thing. They are trying to run Nicol Bolas the Ravager. And I'm going to kind of talk about these decks separately because there's certain things that they have they have in common, whereas there's other things that they're completely different on. And we'll start here with the mid-range deck. This is a blue-black mid-range deck that is splashed red simply for Nicol Bolas the Ravager. And we notice, if you look here, there's not even a braid in the sideboard. Like, the only reason this deck has red in it at all is to cast Nicol Bolas. Now, if you ask me, probably could have got away with it with Aether Hubs. But, a couple Sulfur Falls, some, Canyon Sloughs and Dragon Skull Summits do make it quite possible for you to be able to cast, all three colors. Grixis has perfect mana, so there's a lot of ways you can tweak it. You can, flex it towards black, you can flex it towards blue, you can flex it towards red, you can balance it out. So that's one of the things about having perfect mana is you're going to be able to just kind of do whatever you want with the exchange of some of these split lands. Now, because of that, you do have a ton of split lands. Sometimes those are going to enter the battlefield tapped, but because this is a kind of a mid-range style control deck, it's not really going to be that big of a deal. This is your more control-based mid-range deck running Nicol Bolas, and but because of that, it has a really, really vast toolbox, and it has some really good card selection as well with the Champion of Wits. Champion of Wits and Glint Sleeve Siphoner give you a lot of card draw, and then of course if you can flip Nicol Bolas the Arisen, then you're going to, or flip the Ravager into the Arisen, then its plus is draw 2 cards, guys. Draw 2 cards. This deck actually is one of the few decks that has really good answers to Carnage Tyrant. You're going to be able to keep the board clean for the most part, as you are a removal based deck, and then you can use your Doomfalls to make them get rid of the Carnage Tyrant, or even get rid of the Carnage Tyrant beforehand. Now, this is not really a counter deck. We don't have a lot of counters here. We've got Essence Scatter, and then we've got to commit to Memory. For the most part, this is a Nicol Bolas deck, but it is using the blue-black mid-range to kind of tie everything in. Nicol Bolas paired with the Scarab God and Liliana, just absolutely phenomenal. If you can get Nicol Bolas down early, you're instantly going to get that 2-for-1 if it does enter the battlefield. So if it resolves, you instantly 2-for-1. All right, so we'll talk about that when we get into the red deck. But the blue-black mid-range here, splashing red, turning it into Grixis. I like this deck. It does have that great toolbox. A lot of 2-for-1s, perfect mana. It's, really strong deck. Now, as far as weaknesses, the deck is kind of weak to enchantment-based removal and Approach of the Second Sons, because you don't really have a way to counter Approach of the Second Sons. If you're planning to get to turn 7, they could actually be winning by turn 7. So, or at least putting themselves with the threat of winning, knowing that you have no card in your main board that could stop them. So that is something that you kind of need to worry about. It does have a commit to Memory in the main board where you can commit the second one, but then you've only delayed the inevitable just a little bit longer. It could also have a lot of dead cards against those control decks. Carnage Tyrant, you could put that up there as being kind of a slight weakness, but a lot of people are a lot of decks are weak to Carnage Tyrant, so I don't really know if I want to say that this deck is weak to Carnage Tyrant. No more so than any other deck. At least it does have those answers with like Doomfall and such. Now, as far as complexity, I'm going to say this deck is upwards, 2.5, 3 on complexity. You're going to get some really in-depth games. You're going to get to do some really cool stuff. Being able to, like, do I start drawing cards with my Argyle's Bloodfast? When are we going to try to flip it? But I can't really give it the full 3 on complexity because you're going to win so many games by just turn 4 Bolas. Okay, then they pass back to you, and you go, okay, well, here's the Scarab God. You didn't stop Bolas. Can you stop this? Okay, well, that's game. Like, so many games are just going to be won that way. Like, that's just how it's going to go down. They're going to spend their early turns trying to stop these Glint Sleeve Siphoners and Champion of Wits, which they do need to stop. And then Bolas is going to come down instantly 2 for 1 them. They lose a card from their hand. Now they don't have an answer to deal with the Scarab God. Or they use their answer on, Nicol Bolas, which comes down the turn before the Scarab God, and now they don't have an answer for the Scarab God. So that is something to think about. As far as complexity goes, you are just going to kind of run over certain decks. Some decks, it's just going to be a free win. Land the Scarab God, they scoop. Why do you want to play it? You're a blue-black mid-range fan. I think this is the next evolution. I think this is where the blue-black mid-range is kind of going to go. I like the idea of the blue-black splashed red for Bolas. So cool deck. UB red. Is that what we're going to call this one? UB red. Why wouldn't you want to play this deck? Because you just don't want to go to the dark side yet, right? You just don't want to play the Scarab God, or you don't own them. And I can understand that. You don't own the Scarab God, you don't have Nicol Bolas, you can't play the deck. But if you own the cards, if you're already playing the blue-black deck, you have the Nicol Bolases, you got the lands, stick them in, give it a try. I think you're going to like it. I've run a couple test games with this version and the next version I'm about to show you. I personally like the next version best, but that's because it does fit my gameplay a little bit better here. So now this one's going to give you some really in-depth gameplay. There's some cool interactions. There's things you can do. My personal opinion is we don't need quite so many Whirler Virtuosos. We need a couple more Champion of Wits. I'm not real sure on the Supreme Wheel. I'm going to be making some changes to this deck, but I've run a couple games with it so far. And I really like what it's got going on. This is an energy-based or a synergy mid-range deck with control elements to it. You do have a lot of kill, you have a little bit of counter, and you have some seriously devastating threats. People have to be able to answer Glint Sleeve Siphoners against you because you have so many ways to guarantee that you're going to be able to draw those cards. They do not know that you're not going to be able to draw a card just because you started out with out an Aether Hub with the Glint Sleeve Siphoner trigger on the stack against a control deck. You can cast Harness Lightning targeting the Glint Sleeve Siphoner and then spend 0 energy before the Glint Sleeve Siphoner ability ever checks. You just put 3 extra energy in your pool. Now the ability goes, hey, do you want to pay for it? And you're like, well, I have all this energy. I think I'll pay for it and draw that extra card. It allows you to turn some of the dead cards that you would have in other matchups into better or more cards. And then again, we seen earlier in the Jeskai deck, you could also just turn it into Thopters for more beaters. But most of the time, let's just turn it into more cards, right? We just want to draw a card every turn with Glint Sleeve Siphoner. Personally, Glint Sleeve Siphoner has been one of my favorite cards. So I think this is like one of the better Glint Sleeve Siphoner decks. I do think that, I want more Harness Lightning in this deck. Zombies are getting pretty big. Burn-based removal is not really good at dealing with zombies unless, it can get higher than 3. So that's something that I kind of want to play around with. I'm going to be looking at this deck really closely over the course of the next week here. Everyone knows that I'm a big fan of Grixis, and Grixis Control is back, baby. Let's do this, Why do you want to play it? Well, for that main reason right there. Grixis Control's back, and if you've ever played Grixis, it's a brewer's deck. There's always so many good cards in red, blue, and black that you could put so many combinations of this deck together, and they would probably be viable combinations. But if you're one of those people that likes to call yourselves a meta caller, you know what your buddies are going to bring to F&M. Who cares about what all is being played, but you know this guy's going to have this guy's going to have this. You can tailor this deck to exactly your specifications, and Nicol Bolas fits absolutely terrifically in the deck. Now, why wouldn't you want to play this? Because it's an energy deck, and maybe it's still a little too soon, right? Too soon. Right? Temur's dead, guys. It's okay. Temur's a ramp deck now. All right. Let's talk about the last version of Grixis here, and I'm calling this one Grixis Red or Bolas Red. This is a red-black deck that has decided, hey, I'm a red deck already splashing black for Scrap Heap Scrounger and Unlicensed Disintegration. Could we splash blue, get Nicol Bolas in instead of Hazoret, and instead of Hazoret and Phoenix? Okay, so we notice here no Heart of Kirin. I think that that's the right call. I don't think that we're in the place for Heart of Kirin right now. I think that we want a more powerful a card a little bit farther up the line. Bolas does fit that criteria. When comparing him against Hazoret, I don't really know if Bolas's 2-for-1 is enough, as Hazoret really finishes games really quick. Giving you the ability to throw cards away. But because this deck has actually splashed the Scarab God and Banefire in the deck, it actually doesn't need the Hazards. You're not going to be able to dump your hand. We'll see that there's no Bomat Couriers in the deck, which I'm actually kind of on the fence about. I am really weary about the Bomat Couriers, and now that Unlicensed Disintegration doesn't have as many artifact targets, I'm actually a little bit on the fence about Unlicensed Disintegration in this deck. Now, if you guys want to check the little information icon up here, I'm going to put a link to Dusk Till Dawn Gaming. He just played 5 games with this, and I watched those, and it seemed really clunky as far as the mana base and how it rolled out. So it's not the smoothness that you would expect from a red-black deck. I think this was someone was trying a new deck. They were trying it. It does work. Bolas is better than Phoenix as far as the guaranteed 2-for-1. Phoenix will sometimes be a 2-for-1, but if Bolas resolves, you're going to get the 2-for-1. If Phoenix resolves, they might be just Vraska's Contempt it. The only way for them to stop the 2-for-1 is to just counter the spell altogether. And the same goes for the Phoenix. If they can counter the Phoenix or they can counter the Bolas, they stop it. But other than counters, when it enters the battlefield, you're gonna get that card out of their hand. So even if they remove it after the fact, you're still gonna get that card out of their hand. So against decks like the blue-black mid-range, where they are going to target your creatures to remove them, Nicol Bolas plays really well there. Now, of course, if you do flip him, things go a little bit crazy. This deck can actually flip him on turn 6. So the reason you can't flip him on turn 5 is because you actually need turn 5 to play the Chandra if you played him on 4, or you play him on, or play Chandra on 4 and play him on 5. Start upticking, things like that. You're going to be able to get that extra little bit of ramp from Chandra. Chandra also plays really well with the Scarab God, giving you extra mana, so that you can get multiple Scarab God the Scarab God activations per turn. Again, Chandra works well with one of the new cards here, Banefire. Some people are trying to put more copies of Banefire in the sideboard and the main board. You'll see people casting Banefire online a lot. So overall, the deck has multiple must-answer threats. That's kind of its biggest strength, that you've got to answer these cards or they're going to kill you. You are putting your opponents on the back foot most of the time. Now, as far as weaknesses go, I think the biggest weakness to this deck is probably going to be enchantment-based removal or its own clunky mana base. Yes, I said that Grixis has a perfect mana base, but this particular mana base does seem a little bit clunky to be trying to cast Goblin Chain Whirler. So you kind of got to decide, am I still a Chain Whirler deck, or am I a Nicol Bolas the Scarab God deck? And I'm not for sure this deck has done it, 100%. But I do want to say that kudos to the person who put this deck together for even making it workable. As just building the mana base has got to be a challenge. Even Dustil Dawn Gaming said that. Duskblader over there. Check him out if you want to, guys. Link should be right up here. I'm going to put that up there. Why do you want to play this deck, and why do you not want to play this deck? If you're going to play this deck, you're probably going to do it to prove me wrong, right? Because I'm saying don't play it, right? Don't play this deck. There's another version. If you're wanting to play this deck, you're just wanting to try it out in your red-black aggro deck, yeah, you can go for that. But I actually think that you're just going to have a more consistent deck by just playing red-black aggro. Nicol Bolas does give you, that aerial threat that is kind of hard to deal with. If you do flip him, you got another game ender. But then again, so is a 4/4 flyer. It is a game ender by itself. So there's that. The mana base is really clunky, and I think you're losing a lot of consistency to get this extra color in here. So, why don't you want to play it? Probably because you're a Johnny, and not a Johnny, but you're a Johnny. And if you're a Johnny, then you probably know that there's a better way to play this Nicol Bolas. We could abuse this Nicol Bolas a little bit more than what we have going on here, and I think we can abuse this Nicol Bolas even a little bit more than what we have going on in the Grixis Energy deck. Chandra, Liliana, and Nicol Bolas, I want them all. I'm looking for a Grixis Walker's Energy deck, so we're gonna go somewhere along those routes. High value, big mana. Yeah, we're gonna do it, guys. My name's Eric. You've been watching Sideboardmtg. Thank you so much for sticking around if you have stuck around this long. We're going to continue to work on the recording issues. Right now, everything seems to be okay as far as recording goes. Still having some issues on the upload, so probably just going to go back to putting those recorded videos out for just a little while until we can get this figured out. But thank you all for your feedback on the previous version of this video. I have had to go back and re-record it again. Hopefully I didn't leave anything out. I did have my notes here that I had to go make. Oh man, been a good day. But thank you guys so much for your support and your patronage. If you want to become a patron, you can do that in the link below. I'm putting links up for all of these decks, so if you do want to see them, you want to use the quick rent links. All of the links are made in Mana Traders, so if you're a Mana Traders user, just click rent, and the bot will deliver you your cards. Mana Traders is up. It is the 11th. We do have access to all cards as of right now. So yeah. Let's have some fun with M19, guys. We'll see you next time here on Sideboardmtg.